set of conversations we're going to have, which is going to be a discussion session that will be chaired by Chris Zikiti. Now, Chris Zikiti is the author, is an author, and is also the head of programs, transformation and delivery for NHS England. And he's a qualified mental health nurse himself, and he'll be facilitating a discussion on how the family unit and community can support the campaign in suicide reduction against Black men. And joining Chris Zikiti on this panel of discussion will be Dr. Charles Stephen. Dr. Charles Stephen himself is an entrepreneur, a public speaker, and a personal development coach who is passionate about equipping communities with sound philosophy of self-development and living a focused life of purpose. Charles will chronicle a personal lived experience of losing a family member to suicide. And also joining the discussion will be Pastor Nick Dube. Pastor Nick Dube is an author, coach, and speaker, and he's passionate about helping men and young people develop and maximize their leadership skills. He has served in church leadership and ministry for over 20 years and as a pastor for 10 years, and is also an independent certified coach, trainer, and speaker mentored by John C. Maxwell, whom we all know. Nick will be discussing ways of addressing suicide amongst pastors, which, if I may add, has skyrocketed in recent times. So I'll hand over to Chris Zikiti to carry us on this panel conversation. Chris?
Great. Adi, thank you very much. And it's great to be here. And Ethel, thank you for the invite. He Matters is actually, it's critical, especially during this pandemic. Mental health has become even more and more important. It is such a privilege to have this time to talk to Charles and Nick, and for Charles and Nick to share their own experiences. And thank you for everyone who joined. And I hope this discussion will highlight some awareness around the issue of suicide in Black men. I'm going to start briefly with talking to Charles and Nick and just give them some few minutes just to talk a bit about why they are passionate about men, committing suicide, and also their personal story in how they got involved in this agenda or in this movement. Charles, if I start with you, just to give us a summary of your story, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Chris. Thanks a lot, Ethel. Thank you, everybody. My name is Charles Stephen. I hope you can all hear me. Yeah, it's great to be here. I've known Ethel for quite a number of years. So when she approached me and asked me to share my story in this platform, there was only going to be one answer, and that was going to be yes. And she's a wonderful person. She's a great mentor to a lot of people, and I really look up to her in that respect. Now, the reason I'm here is to tell a bit of my personal story. I lost my brother to suicide. His name was Stephen. In 2003. It was actually April 2003. He was still quite young. He was only 25 years old then when he passed, and that was a huge blow to the whole family as a result. But very unfortunately, well, I'm originally from Tanzania. I live in the UK at the moment, but he passed away in Tanzania, and the way things are done in Tanzania, usually suicides are treated as a taboo, and people don't talk about them at all. And that was certainly the case in my family, that we never really approached this crisis head on afterwards, as in really addressing the issues, really addressing our feelings and our emotions and what we felt about it. And we didn't do that, and we just buried that, and nobody really talked about it. But personally, I really struggled with it, and I'm quite sure the rest of my family did as well. And what I struggled with the most personally was the fact that I looked up to my brother, and I always considered him a better man than I was. And so his death really made me question my reason to live, really. Not that I was contemplating suicide or anything that extreme, but it just made me feel guilty to be alive, because it made me feel that if he didn't deserve to live and he died, and why am I still alive? And I really struggled with that. But also you have lots of regrets, as things like, should I have seen the signs? Should we have have done things differently? Should I have engaged with my brother more? Should I have spent more time with him? Should I have been more in contact with him? You know, you think of all those things that you haven't done, and that eats you because you don't have a place to vent them out. You don't have a place to really sort of pour yourself out, if you like. And like what the previous speaker was talking, sometimes it's really difficult for men to do that. So I really struggle with it. But one place I could say that really helped me was faith. I found faith when I was really young, and that became my beacon of strength. Not so much that I could talk about this particular matter, but that's where you get support. That's where you find your purpose in life, and that really helped me pick myself up and live. And it's only until recently that I've been able to share my story like I'm doing today. And I'm so happy to do that because I believe that by sharing this story can help others and other families to really handle this matter better and hopefully help to reduce this great tragedy that nobody should go through at all in their lives.
Great, thanks, Charles. I'm just going to move to Nick, and Nick, for you to just give us your take. Obviously, we are looking at pastors, and myself as well. I grew up in in church with my parents, and a pastor for me was someone who was very, very strong. Very, very strong. And so, Nick, if you can just give us a bit of an introduction on the issue around suicide in pastors before we have a further discussion with Charles, that would be really helpful for our listeners this afternoon.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Ethel, Charles, and everyone in this. It's strange to even have those two words in the same sentence, pastors and suicide, because by their very nature, they speak life, they represent life, but to talk about them committing suicide, it's been a challenging thing, even as we have seen a lot more cases in the past few years. Yeah. And the painful thing is that it cuts across races, it cuts across different backgrounds. We've seen cases in the States, cases in Africa, even murder, suicide issues by pastors, and their wives, in some cases right in church, and so that's a very, very painful thing, for us to be able to look at. And for me, it's a reflection of where the church is in terms of dealing with mental health. That if the pastors are struggling to the level of taking on their own lives, how much more the average person, the average mother and child and father in the church, where then do they cast their hope? So as a church and as believers, we need to then come back and look at what does the Bible say? What does the Bible say about mental health? What does the Bible say about depression and about stress? And, a lot of research has been done on pastors, and it has been noted that most pastors, or rather pastors, they suffer for the most burnout, depression, anxiety, and a lot of things. But the challenge, I suppose, in the church that we're still rising to is that we don't have a platform where we can talk openly about that. Like Charles said, it is as if to admit you are struggling is to admit you lack faith, and to admit you have problems is to admit you don't trust God. And many times, I grew up with mental health issues in my family. I have a sister that is still being treated up to today. When I got saved at 11 years old and I went to church, for many years, all church told me was any mental health struggle is demonic. Just pray more, just cast out the devil. But as I grew up and became a lead and became a pastor, I said, I love God. I trust God. But sometimes life was just too much. The job as a pastor was just too much. Personal issues at home were just too much. And it had nothing to do with my praying or my faith in God, but it had everything to do with how do I handle everyday life and the stresses of life. And so the many reasons why pastors in particular, are suffering through many of those challenges, they are human beings too. They're dealing with issues in their marriage. They're dealing with financial issues. They're dealing with the burden and the pressure of ministry. They're dealing with a whole lot of things, and sometimes some of them are lonely and isolated. Statistics show many pastors give up on the job, because of all that pressure. But also the challenge we, I suppose, need to start the conversation is, what does that say about how the church is dealing with it? If the pastor himself can't admit, I always love the story of Jesus, when he said, look at my scars, touch my hands and look at my scars. Because it's not about the resurrected me, but it's also about the scars that I've been through. So can we have an environment in church where pastors can show us their scars? So where we don't just celebrate each other for the blessings and what God has done, but we say, this is who we are. This is what I have gone through. Can we, I'm amazed with a lot of mental health professionals on this platform and in different churches. And as we've spoken about it, can that not be part of the church culture and having supporting teams that work with the pastor? How do we deal with toxic environments in churches that make it difficult for me to share? I'm struggling because I might be on the pastor's sermon, or might be have hands pointing at me and say, oh, he lost his job, the marriage is in trouble, the kids are not behaving okay. And people end up leaving churches and end up, giving up on life. So it's said that the church should be an institution of hope and life, and people should run to church as who they are. Being able to seek God's help and the love and the support of the brethren without the fear of being judged. But it's not the case all the time. We have work to do, and maybe we'll pick up on some points as we just discuss further on. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah. No. Thanks, Nick. And I've got a few more questions for both of you, Charles and Nick. And the next question, if it's okay, just to give like a 2-minute response so that I can get to the other questions I want to ask you. So, Charles, your story, it's absolutely, I felt it as you were talking, and what I wanted to find out from you is around what has been the impact to your family, especially when you start thinking about the stigma associated sometimes with suicide. What has been the impact to your family, and how have you dealt with it as a family?
Oh, thank you so much, Chris. It's like I said before, it's quite unfortunate that the culture in Tanzania, and that could be said with a lot of African countries, is that when it comes to these matters, people tend to just duck their heads down under the sand and pretend nothing happened, basically, and not really address the issues. And that certainly has been the case in our families, and that has caused a lot of problems. I can certainly speak for myself that I lived with a lot of grief. I lived with a lot of disappointment. I lived with a lot of finger pointing, even sometimes, because at the time when my brother committed suicide, I was actually here in the UK. So I started blaming those that were in Tanzania with him, like if they did more, if they, supported him more, if they did this or if they did that. So there was a lot of this blame game going, but then we didn't really address that issue, and therefore there was a lot of what's the word? Bitterness and resentment even, but it was all unexpressed, all undealt with, and as a result, you tend to live with that, and that leads to lots of other problems in family relation and family structure that cause a lot of problems. But it's quite unfortunate that I never really got the time to address that as a family. In that way, because that's how the culture is done. It took me many years to really come to the other side and really get that total healing, and it's mainly attributed to my faith and the fact that that's where I got hope. That's where I got the sense of purpose, really.
Yeah. No. Thanks, Charles. And the issue around talking, I think it's a theme, isn't it? And Wellington, Makala earlier on spoke about the issue around talking as well, which was really great, Wellington, to mention that it seems as if it's a theme that we need to talk more. And so, Nick, obviously, like I said, a pastor is seen in a different light in a society, in a community. What is the impact? So if a pastor ends up committing suicide, what's the impact to the community, to the church?
I mean, if you look at us as Black people across the world, we never went to therapy. We never did professional counseling, but church was our go-to place. Of all the places, church is our source of hope. Church is where we believe, all our burdens will be lifted. And so when a pastor takes their own life, you can imagine, the hopelessness, if a man of God, who talks to God, hears from God, delivers all this powerful ministry, cannot have hope to live. How much more for me as a man, if my life is breaking down? So it is a serious impact, in terms of, the people that we look up to, in terms of the support systems in church.
Yeah.
And just the hope of going to church. I mean, we grew up in church, it sustains all our lives. And if my pastor takes their own life, it's almost like, what's the point of living for me as a man, as a husband, as a father? Where is the hope? And it also destroys a very critical place that is supposed to be a place of refuge, a place of support, a place of sustenance. And I think we have cornered ourselves as a church that way, in not being able to address these things openly and adequately, yet they are everywhere in the Bible. I mean, imagine case in point, Job, we know all about Job, loved God, trusted God, but in one day lost everything and was in a state of depression for some time. Elijah, 24 hours ago, he was anointed, bringing fire from heaven. The following day, he was wanting to die and commit suicide and say, God, kill me, in a state of depression. David, much of the book of Psalms is about David in depression. We read, oh, my soul, my bones are dry. The guy was running away from Saul for 7 years. Actually, in one point, he had to pretend to have lost his mind and started barking like a dog. So the church needs to reopen the Bible and say, God is interested in your spirit and in being spiritual. That's true. But also God is interested in your physical body and physical wellness, how you eat, how you rest, how you exercise. But also God is interested in your mental and emotional well-being. That's why in 3 John 2, he says, beloved, above all, I wish you will prosper as your soul prospers. The soul is your emotion and your thinking. So there is no prosperity in business, in finance, in marriage, if your thinking is not prospering, if your emotions, how you master your emotions is not prospering. But I feel like we are not taught well enough those things. We are taught, be prayerful, be powerful, be spiritual, but we are not taught the detail of how do I deal with anger when it comes? How do I deal with hopelessness? How do I deal with, I just lost my job? I can pray, but the thoughts going through my mind right now are not spiritual or prayerful. The feelings of dejection and failure as a man are not high. We don't live on that. Church ought to give us Sunday equipment that makes us answer Monday problems and not just live on a high.
Yeah. No, thank you. That's powerful, Nick. That's really powerful, and it's putting things into context. And thank you for that. And I can see some messages, coming through from our audiences, and which is just, acknowledging some of the points you're both raising, Charles and Nick. So coming back to our main focus, for this conversation, it was around how family and community can support the campaign of suicide prevention, amongst Black men. So how can family and community support? If I start with you, Nick, first, and then go to Charles, how can family and community support this initiative? And I'll give you about 2 minutes to come. Yeah, how best we can support this.
First of all, I think I'll start with pastors. Just like Jesus, don't be afraid to show your scars. Be human, be yourself. You don't have a supernatural mind yet. You don't have a supernatural body yet. No matter how anointed you are, you need help, you need support, you need people around you. Jesus, being God, the very first thing he did was delegate. And because he can't carry everything himself, the work belongs to God. I was touched by the words of a lady in the States, a mega church. The husband committed suicide. When the lady was interviewed, she had gone to the elders and said, can you give my husband a break from ministry so we can solve our marriage issues before he took his life? And the church elder says, no, we need him on the pulpit. He's the main man. And she said to them, the church belongs to God. God will take care of his own church. The man needs to take care of himself and rest and be well. And so we need a church culture. We need the pastors being open, but also we need the church not being judgmental. We need believers not being judgmental. Yes, leaders have to live by example, but we need that space of them being human. Let's preach about it more. Let's make it part of our preaching in young people, in ladies ministry, in couple seminars, in all our conversation. Let's make it part of everything. Let's utilize the health professionals in the church and form a counseling department that works with the pastor, helps the pastors with issues of trust and confidentiality, so that when people share things, they don't end up on the announcements or on people having coffee. So let's develop those professional ethics that sometimes rob the church, of being able to be a credible place where people can feel free to be themselves. So let's develop all those a clear access to resources. Let our mental health professionals tell us, if you're struggling with a family member, this is where you go. This is where the support is. When people are sick physically, we lay hands on them and pray them, but we encourage them to go to the doctors and take their medication. Let's also look at the mental and emotional struggles. Pray for people, but have systems that can deal with mental issues, emotions issues, and address them, because the Bible is a balanced, holistic thing. That's why God made us spirit, soul, and body. Let the church rise and address all those issues, and not just the spiritual side only. But let's create an environment that is non-judgmental, that is not competitive. So if me and my family are struggling, I've lost my job, we don't have the latest car, we shouldn't feel judged in church. And the final point is with church is, if we don't create that environment, we end up having people live in church. But my senior pastor always says, people don't live churches, people live people. People live toxic environments, they don't live churches. And so we have a lot of work to do in creating an environment that is not judgmental, but that allows people to be helped and supported. That's what church is all about, Most of you guys are working in the health sector. How would you feel if you walked to a hospital and were surprised that, what are all these sick people doing here? That's what the hospital is for. So you shouldn't go to church and say, why is she having problems? Why is there marriage? That's what church is for. That's why Jesus died. It should be normal for people to go through things and get practical support, and not it just to be some high super spiritual environment only. It's a place of healing, help, and support. Let's make it so. And we will find more men coming up, and more men talking, and more men not taking their lives.
No, Nick, thank you very much. I'll quickly move to Charles. Charles, I'll give you 2 minutes, please, to just come back to this question here.
I've got 3 things to say about that, to be honest. First one is, I think the very definition of what a strong man has to change, because I think at the moment the assumption is, if you're a strong man, to be a strong man, you should have it all together, and that you're mentally, you've got everything under control. And I think that's a fallacy, and it's what really drives a lot of men into even more frustration, because when a man feels like he's lost it, he feels like he's an odd one out, which really leads me to the second point, which I think we need to normalize these conversations about mental health, conversations about failure, conversations about not really feeling like you've got everything together. And I think the more we normalize them, the more we have this sort of conversation, the more we have spaces like these, I think men would feel more at ease to talk about them, because they realize they're not alone. You realize that everybody is going through the same boat. And the last thing I have to point out, I think it speaks to the next generation. I think as men, as fathers, for instance, I'm a father of two boys, an 11-year-old and a 7-year-old. I think we need to start allowing ourselves to express our feelings to our children and our family. In a sense that as a father, I need to be able to show my children that I'm feeling down, that there are things that are not going the way I thought they would go, and that is not a good place to be. The reason I'm saying that is because, and this is out of reflection, so many fathers, what they tend to do is they have all these things. There is only one way they vent out their issues, and that is through anger. So every time they come home, the only way their family knows that dad is not going through a good patch is when he's shouting at everybody, when he's angry, when he's locking himself away, that kind of thing. So I think it's very important to have these variety of emotions that we can express, but also we can talk about these things with our children, because that way when they grow up, they will learn to express themselves as well.
Charles, thank you very much. And I think the issues you have raised, honestly, I picked up a few things around, the culture of silence in communities and churches. Don't be afraid to show your scars, Nick said, and the issue around the impact on family and community, and trying to normalize the conversations. On that note, Nick, Charles, I want to thank you. Thank you for sharing your stories. Nick, thank you for sharing the issues around pastors. Charles, talking about your own personal life, personal reflections. That's really powerful. And those who are listening, I know the time it's not always enough. And I would love to come back. I think Ethel and I were talking about this, that we need to come back again and continue a discussion with Charles and Nick. And they both agree that actually this is not the first, but this is just the beginning of our conversations. But I just want to say again to the two of you, thank you so much for sharing your reflections. Back to you, Ade. Thank you.
Wow, thank you for that, Chris and Charles and Pastor Nick. What a wonderful conversation you've had, and wonderful sets of points and wisdom you shared, and everyone in the chat have been saying how much they agree with the points that you've said, and thank you for those very balanced and very thoughtful contributions. We have a few comments coming up in the chat, and I'm just going to read one or two of them out. I may not necessarily take them in terms of response at the moment, but we'll create a bit of space for us to take up that. But I just didn't want us to lose the thoughts, because I think they're coming from a place that is important. But before I do that, just wanted to say again, if you feel triggered in any way based on the conversations that's been had this afternoon, by all means, please reach out for help. The He Matters team have put in the chat where you can contact for help. You can contact He Matters directly, or you can also seek help from your local community intervention teams. Please reach out for help if you feel triggered in any way by these conversations. We do understand the sensitive nature of the discussions we're having this afternoon. And also, we will create the space for us to have this chat with Ethel later on in the event, just after the program is finished. Now, quickly, I'm just going to read this because we're running 10 minutes behind schedule. I'm going to be very swift with this before I hand over to our next speaker, who has already been spotlighted, and I love his wonderful smile. Someone said, I really struggle with the concept of religion, especially in the African concept as Christians. I find this as a huge problem and a great source of cognitive dissonance. And I think Pastor Nick has very aptly addressed that and has also shared some wonderful nuggets for you to take on board on how we could start to deal with some of those issues, especially. There was another point that was raised by someone else who was asking a question. This has not necessarily been thoroughly addressed, but we'll leave this till later. It says, is the portrayal of Jesus as white in Christianity, oops, I'm losing it. Yeah, got it back. As white in Christianity and the role of Christianity in the subjugation of African people through slavery, colonialism, and the continuing experience of racism plays a part in the propensity for some of our young men to be confused and to take their own lives. That is now speaking more to the portrayal of Christ as white, and also the role of Christianity in the subjugation of African people through slavery, colonialism, and our history. So it's marrying quite a lot of social issues, social and historical issues there. We don't yet have definitive response to that from the conversation we've had, but I'll leave that to Pastor Nick to brood over it, and maybe at some point we're going to come to that at the event. But for now,